Yelena Rossi Vital was 32 weeks pregnant when she came home carrying an ultrasound photograph and found her husband kissing her younger sister inside his private office. She did not see them immediately. First came Gianna's low, breathless laugh from behind the partly open study door. Snow still clung to Elena's wool coat, and a tiny blue Christmas stocking hung from her wrist. The Vital mansion glowed above Lake Michigan, every window warm, every wreath tied with the red velvet ribbon Luca claimed not to notice and secretly straightened when it hung crooked. Elena had left the charity dinner early because the baby would not stop pressing beneath her ribs. She wanted to surprise Luca with the first clear image of their son's face. Luca had missed the appointment and sent 12 white roses with a message that said, "Meeting at the docks. Forgive me." Elena had forgiven more meetings than she could count. She entered through the side door so the staff would not announce her. Halfway down the hall, Jana laughed again. It was the same laugh Elena remembered from summers when they had shared a bedroom and whispered about boys after midnight. Elena reached the study and looked through the opening. Gianna's hand was curled around the lapel of Luca's black jacket. Then Luca bent his head and kissed her. The little stocking slipped from Elena's fingers. Its silver bell struck the marble floor once. Luca broke away. Jana turned, her lipstick blurred at one corner, the top 2 buttons of her blouse undone. For a moment, nobody moved. Elena looked at the sister whose college tuition she had paid, whose first apartment she had furnished, whose hand she had held through their mother's funeral. Then she looked at the man who had placed his palm over her stomach every night and promised their child would never know fear. Luca took one step toward her. "Elena." She raised her hand. He stopped. Men with guns stopped when Luca Vital raised one finger. That night, he stopped for her. "How long?" she asked. Luca's face changed, but Gianna answered, 11 months. The baby moved beneath Elena's heart. 11 months meant the affair had begun 3 months before her pregnancy. It included Easter, her birthday, the night Luca cried when the first test turned positive, and every Sunday Gianna had eaten at their table. Elena's gaze drifted past them to Luca's desk. A cream folder lay open beside 2 glasses of wine. The first page bore Elena's name. The signature at the bottom looked almost like hers. The second page was titled Emergency Maternal Guardianship Petition. The third transferred her voting shares in Rossi Maritime to Luca if a physician declared her emotionally unfit. Gianna followed her eyes and quickly moved in front of the desk. Too late. "You were going to take my father's company," Elena said. Luca's jaw tightened. "I was protecting it." "From whom?" "From the investigation coming through the harbor." "Then why does that paper call me unstable?" He glanced at Jana. The glance lasted less than a second, but Elena understood it. Jana had written the story. Luca had decided it was useful. "Pregnancy has been difficult for you," he said. "The panic attacks, the hospital visits. I had one panic attack after a truck followed me home." Elena's voice stayed quiet. "Your truck, as I later learned," Luca said nothing. "You had me frightened, then paid a doctor to describe the fear as illness. I never intended to take the baby. There is a custody request beneath your hand. Temporary custody until you were well." Elena stared at him. "I am standing in my own home while my husband kisses my sister beside papers designed to erase me. And you still believe the dangerous thing in this room is my judgment." Gianna folded her arms. You were never interested in the business until you thought you might lose it. Elena turned to her. I spent 6 years making Luca's legitimate companies clean enough for banks to touch. You spent 11 months helping him forge my name. Color rose in Jana's face. He came to me because you made him feel ashamed of what he was. No, Elena said. He came to you because shame required change, and admiration required nothing. Luca flinched harder at that than he had at the accusation of forgery. Elena bent slowly, picked up the tiny stocking and brushed a speck of dust from the white cuff. Luca's eyes dropped to it. What is that? Something for a family that no longer exists? She turned toward the hall. Elena, wait. Luca came after her. She faced him so quickly he stopped again. If you touch me, I will scream. Your guards will hear their boss frightening his pregnant wife, and by morning, every man at the harbor will know exactly what happened in this house. He lowered his hands. We can talk when you are calm. Elena gave him a look so steady that his last words seemed to embarrass even him. I am calm. That is why you should be afraid. She removed her wedding ring, set it on the hall table, and placed the ultrasound photograph beneath it. Our son has your mouth, she said. Luca looked down. In that half-second, Elena walked past him. Where are you going? Somewhere you cannot decide what I need. Security will drive you. No, it is snowing. I noticed. She opened the side door. Luca's voice followed her into the cold. You cannot disappear from me. Elena looked back at the man Chicago called untouchable. By sunrise, she said, you will discover how little of my life you ever truly owned. Then she stepped into the snow and closed the door. At the end of the service lane, a gray sedan waited with its lights off. Elena climbed into the passenger seat. Rose Bennett, her father's 68-year-old attorney, took one look at her face and started the engine. Did you see enough? Rose asked. Elena took a small brass key from the lining of her glove and placed it in the cup holder. More than enough. 3 months earlier, Elena had found her signature on a loan guarantee she had never seen. Rose had urged her to prepare quietly. Together they had copied the company records. Certified copies went to a bank vault controlled by Elena's family trust. The oldest original ledgers remained in the fireproof archive beneath Rossi's disused ferry terminal, which required Elena's brass key and a trustee token stored at the bank. Rose also built what she called the Sunday Plan. A route out of Chicago, a protected apartment, new phones, sealed medical care, and emergency filings ready to be submitted the moment Elena gave the word. Elena had resisted. Preparing to leave felt like betraying a marriage she still hoped to save. Tonight, Luca had done her the cruel favor of ending that hope. Rose pulled onto the highway while snow covered their tracks. Say it, she said. Elena watched the mansion disappear behind bare trees. Her hand settled over the child turning inside her. File everything. Before midnight, Luca was served electronically with a petition for divorce, a protective order, and noticed that Elena had revoked every power he held over Rossi Maritime. At 12:07, the company's banks froze all transfers above $50,000. At 12:20, an independent auditor received copies of 9 suspicious transactions. At 12:40, the Federal Harbor Task Force received a sealed package proving that 3 vital-controlled trucking firms had moved undeclared cargo through Rossi terminals. Elena had not given investigators every secret she possessed. She gave them enough to make sure that if Luca came after her, powerful people would ask why. At 1:15, Luca stood alone in his study while phones rang throughout the house. Jana had gone upstairs to change. The wine remained untouched. Elena's ring still lay over the picture of his son's face. Luca picked up the photograph. The baby was no more than a pale curve of cheek and nose, yet Luca stared until the image blurred. Dominic Vale, Luca's security chief and most trusted lieutenant for 12 years, entered without knocking. Her car is at Union Station, empty. Her regular phone is inside it. Cameras lost her 4 blocks away. Airports watched her sister's apartment. Luca looked toward the ceiling, remembering too late that Elena's sister was in his bedroom wing. No. Every property connected to her father, every hospital, every private airfield. Find Rose Bennett. The attorney left her office before 6. Her phone is off. Dominic looked at Elena's ring for half a second longer than necessary. Then he looked back at Luca. Luca's hand closed around the ultrasound picture. Find my wife. The order moved through Chicago before dawn. Men checked train manifests, hotels, toll cameras, and clinics. They found Elena's coat in a bus station locker and a ticket purchased in her name for a train to St. Louis. Elena was traveling north in Rose's car, wearing a knit cap and an old Parker, while a retired nurse monitored her blood pressure from the back seat. 40 Me from Milwaukee. A cramp tightened low across her abdomen. Elena gripped the door handle and breathed. The nurse timed it. 6 minutes later, another came. We need a hospital. Elena shook her head. Not one his men can walk into. The baby does not care who Luca Vital is. Rose exited the highway toward a small medical center already contacted through a domestic violence network. Elena entered under her maiden name. Her address was sealed before the first nurse took her coat. For 9 hours, medication slowed the contractions while snow climbed the windows. Elena lay in a narrow room listening to her son's heart through a monitor. Each quick beat sounded like a decision. Near morning, Rose sat beside her and held out the brass key. The vault stays yours, the company stays yours, but none of it matters if you risk him. Elena closed her fingers around the key. I'm not going back. That was not the question. Rose leaned closer. Do you still think leaving means you failed? Elena looked toward the dark glass. Part of me does. Then that part was trained by a man who benefited from your staying. Back in Chicago, Luca learned about the hospital only after Elena had been discharged to a protected residence. A paid contact found a claim submitted under the Rossi name, but could not access the address. The report said threatened preterm labor. Luca read those 3 words twice. Gianna stood across from his desk wearing one of Elena's robes. She is using the baby to frighten you. Luca looked up. Take that off. Gianna followed his gaze. It's a robe. It is hers. She left it. Take it off. Gianna's expression hardened. You said the marriage was finished. I said I wanted control of the company before the investigation destroyed us. You said you wanted me. Luca folded the hospital report and placed it beside the ultrasound. Leave the room, Gianna. She pulled the robe tighter. She planned this. The documents, the bank freeze, the federal package. Your grieving wife somehow had all of it ready. She did not leave because she found us. She was waiting for a reason. Luca knew Gianna meant the accusation to make Elena look calculating. Instead, it revealed something worse. Elena had been afraid long enough to build an escape and had still come home carrying a gift for him. "Get out," he said. Elena spent the remaining weeks of her pregnancy in a farmhouse outside Madison, owned by a retired judge Rose trusted. There were no gates, guards, or cameras. Every passing car tightened her chest, but she answered investigators, attended divorce hearings by secure video, and slept a little longer each week. Luca contested the financial restrictions and demanded medical confirmation that Elena remained stable. He did not contest the divorce. That hurt in a clean, surprising way. He fought for her shares and challenged the protective order, yet never asked the court to tell her he was sorry. Rose noticed. "Do you want him to?" Elena folded a blue baby blanket at the farmhouse table. "No." Rose waited. Elena ran her palm over the soft edge. "I want to stop wanting him to." Gabriel Rossi was born at 38 weeks during a late winter rainstorm. He weighed 7 lb 2 Oz and arrived furious with the world. When the nurse placed him on Elena's chest, he opened dark gray eyes and quieted at her voice. Elena counted his fingers twice, kissed his damp hair, and made one promise: no one will ever call love a reason to take your choices away. 3 days later, Luca received a sealed court notice confirming only that Elena had entered medical care and remained medically stable. It contained no birth date, no information about the outcome, and no photograph. Rose had obtained an emergency order sealing every birth and pediatric record. Luca read the notice until the afternoon light disappeared. Then he placed it beside the ultrasound picture and the wedding ring Elena had left behind. Elena did not vanish from the law. She vanished from Luca. Under her maiden name, she built a career finding debt powerful men had hidden inside family companies. She worked during Gabriel's naps, raised him through fevers and sleepless nights, and eventually recovered enough stolen pension money to save hundreds of workers' retirements. Motherhood was not graceful, and independence was not easy. Some mornings exhaustion made her cry in the shower because it was the only room where Gabriel could not see. Still, the life was hers. Every difficult piece belonged to her because she had chosen it. Luca's empire survived under growing federal pressure, but Rossi Maritime remained beyond his reach because Elena's trust required her signature for any sale. Gianna moved into the mansion and left months later when Luca refused to marry her. He gave her an apartment and a title in one of his charities. She reminded him that she knew about the forged documents and false medical report. Luca reminded her those secrets could bury them both. What remained between them was not love. It was mutual blackmail wearing expensive clothes. 5 years after the night, Elena walked into the snow. Rossi Maritime faced the vote Luca had been waiting for. A clause in the old family trust allowed temporary control to pass to the board if its owner remained absent from all in-person meetings for 5 consecutive years. Luca's lawyers argued that Elena had abandoned the company and could not protect 600 jobs from a collapsing harbor market. His proposed buyer was a vital holding company. It promised to preserve payroll. Hidden inside the sale were provisions allowing the pension reserve to secure Luca's remaining criminal debt. Rose sent Elena the papers on a Tuesday morning. Gabriel sat at the kitchen counter drawing a fairy with wings. "You can stop the vote without going back," Rose said over the phone. "An injunction may hold for 6 months. Elena studied the signature page. Luca's name appeared above Gianna's, and after 6 months, they try again. Then I am tired of making my life smaller so they can keep pretending I am gone." Rose was silent. "Are you sure?" Elena looked at Gabriel. He was 5 now, serious when he concentrated with Luca's dark eyes and Elena's stubborn mouth. "No," she said, "but I am going home." The Rossi Maritime Board met on the 42nd floor of a glass tower overlooking the river. Luca arrived 10 minutes early with 2 attorneys and no visible security. The men with guns waited in the lobby because even a mafia boss understood that weapons looked bad beside a pension proposal. Gianna entered behind him in a white suit and Elena's mother's sapphire earrings. She had worn them to Elena's wedding as her maid of honor. Now she sat at the far end of the table and arranged a leather folder in front of her as though she belonged there. Luca did not look at her. He studied the empty chair reserved for Elena's family trust. At 9, the board chairman called the meeting to order. At 9:03, Luca's attorney began explaining why a missing owner should not be allowed to paralyze a company. At 9:07, the elevator doors opened behind the glass wall. Rose stepped out first. Elena followed in a charcoal dress, her father's brass key hanging from a plain chain at her throat. Luca stopped breathing for 1 full second. 5 years had changed Elena without making her less familiar. Her hair was shorter. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes that had not been there when she left. She carried no wedding ring, no fear he could see, and no trace of the woman who once waited for him to finish speaking before she decided what she believed. Every person at the table turned. Gianna's pen slipped from her fingers. Elena entered, placed a thick binder before the empty chair, and sat. "Please continue," she said. Luca's attorney cleared his throat. "Mrs. Vital Miss Rossi. Miss Rossi, this meeting concerns a trust provision activated by your prolonged absence. I read the provision. It requires physical attendance by the owner before the final vote." She looked at the chairman. "I am physically attending." The chairman glanced toward counsel, who gave one reluctant nod. Elena slid a document across the table. "I am also exercising the trust's right to suspend any sale involving an undisclosed conflict of interest." Gianna found her voice. "There is no undisclosed conflict." Elena looked at the sapphire earrings, then at her sister's face. "You are sleeping with the buyer." Silence moved through the room like a cold front. Luca leaned forward. "This is not the place. You made my marriage part of your acquisition strategy. You chose the place 5 years ago." She opened the binder. "The board needs to remember only 3 things. My signature was forged on an $8 million guarantee. 3 designs for the terminal expansion were transferred to a vital company without payment, and the proposed sale places our employee pension fund behind Luca's private debt." The chairman looked sharply at Luca. "Is that true?" "The pension provision is temporary collateral," Luca said. Elena turned 1 page. "Temporary until the debt is called. Then 600 people pay for decisions they never made." She passed copies around the table. No long explanation followed. The numbers were circled in red. A list of employee names sat behind them. The first was a mechanic who had worked for Elena's father for 37 years. The second was a dispatcher whose husband had died the previous winter. By the time the list reached Luca, the plan no longer looked like a balance sheet. It looked like faces. Gianna pushed back from the table. "This is theater." Elena vanished. She abandoned every responsibility she had. "I answered every legal request through counsel. You hid a child from his father." Luca's head turned. Elelena went still. Rose placed one hand over the closed folder beside her. The chairman looked from one sister to the other. Gianna realized too late that Luca had not known. "What child?" he asked. Elelena kept her eyes on Gianna. "Not here, Elelena." Luca's voice had changed. The authority was gone from it. "You had the baby?" "Yes, my son is alive." "My son is not a line in this company's minutes." She stood. "The sale is suspended pending an independent audit. Any further questions can go through Luca Rose as well. I need to speak to you. You needed to speak to me before you forged my name." She gathered her papers. "You chose a different conversation." He caught up with her in the private elevator lobby. Rose stepped between them, but Elelena shook her head once. Cameras watched from two corners, and an armed building security officer waited near the elevators. Luca could not turn the hallway into his territory. He stopped 3 feet away. "What is his name?" "Gabriel." The answer left Elena before she could decide whether to give it. Luca repeated it under his breath. "How old you can count." Pain crossed his face, quick and real. Elena hated that a part of her still recognized it. "Does he know about me?" "He knows his father is a man who made dangerous choices. He knows none of those choices were his fault. I searched for you. You searched hospitals for 4 weeks and my company's accounts for 5 years. That is not true." Rose opened her folder and handed him a page. It was a copy of the first search order he had issued after Elelena left. "Find the key. Find the records. Determine whether she can execute transfers." The instruction to confirm her medical safety appeared at the bottom, added 6 hours later. Luca read his own priorities in black ink. "Who gave you this?" "Someone who learned that loyalty to you had an expiration date," Rose said. The elevator arrived. Luca's gaze remained on Elelena. "I want to meet him. Wanting is no longer authority. I am his father. Biology may give you standing. It does not give you trust." Elelena entered the elevator with Rose. Luca put one hand against the door before it closed. The security officer shifted closer. Elena did not step back. "What do I have to do?" he asked. She studied him. 5 years earlier, he would have asked which judge to call, which guard to threaten, which paper to buy. This time, he asked her. It was not enough, but she noticed. "Start by taking your hand off the door." Luca did. The doors closed between them. Gabriel was waiting at Rose's townhouse with a sitter and a half-completed fortress built from couch cushions. When Elelena entered, he ran to her, then stopped because he had recently decided running was for emergencies. "Did you win?" "We stopped them from taking the company. That means you won for today." He considered this distinction and accepted it. "Did you see my father?" Elena set down her bag. She had told him before the trip that Luca lived in Chicago and might appear. "I did. Is he scary?" The easy answer was yes. The honest one was harder. "He scares a lot of people. Does he scare you?" Elena knelt, so they were eye to eye. "He used to." Today he listened when I told him to step back. Gabriel looked toward the cushion wall. "Maybe because you won." "Maybe." He touched the brass key at her neck. "Is that his?" "No. It belonged to your grandfather. It opened something our family protected. Treasure. Records." Gabriel's disappointment was immediate. Elena smiled. "To grown-ups, records can be treasure." That night, Luca sat in his darkened office with the employee list on his desk. Gianna entered without knocking. "You knew," he said. She closed the door. "I suspected. You said Elena lost the baby. I said there was no proof she carried to term. You hired someone to watch the court filings. Jana poured herself a drink. You hired him? I read his reports. Luca stood. Where are they? Gone like everything else from that miserable year. Luca crossed the room. Gianna set down the glass but held her ground. Do not look at me as if I took your son. Elena did that. You knew he might exist, and you let me believe he did not. You let yourself believe it because searching made you look weak. Her words landed because they were true. For the first month, Luca had torn the city apart. By the third, rival families were asking why one missing woman could make him cancel meetings and close routes. He had narrowed the search, then turned it over to men who reported less each week. He told himself Elena was safe because Rose continued filing motions. He told himself the child would appear if born. He had accepted silence because the alternative required admitting that his power could not bring back a woman he had betrayed. Get out of my house, he said. Gianna laughed without humor. Which one? The house Elena decorated. The apartment you gave me. The charity office where you hid $9 million. Luca's face hardened. What did you say? Jana realized her mistake. Nothing. 9 million? He stepped closer. The audit has not published that number. She reached for the door. Luca caught the handle before she did. Where did it go? Ask your accountants. I am asking you. Gianna looked into his face and found the man everyone else feared. Be careful, Luca. If I fall, every document with Elena's false signature falls beside me. Then perhaps it is time they did. The next morning, Rose received a formal request for paternity testing and supervised visitation. Attached to it was a surprising condition. Luca waived any immediate custody claim and agreed that Elena's address would remain sealed. Elena read the papers twice. He is learning to make threats look polite, she said. Rose tapped the waiver. Or he is learning that a request has a better chance than an order. You believe him? I believe ink. This ink protects you for the next 90 days. Eleanor approved a court-supervised DA test. The result came back at 99.99%. Luca's attorney sent no triumphant statement. Luca sent one handwritten note through Rose. I will follow the conditions you set. Elena nearly laughed at the strange achievement of a 45-year-old man promising to obey basic rules. Then she remembered Gianna's public mention of Gabriel and wrote 4 conditions on one page. No surveillance, no access to medical or school records except what the court specifically authorized, no contact outside supervised visits, no attempt to use the vital name, money, or family court to change Gabriel's home. At the bottom, she added, if you break one condition, all visits stop while the court reviews it. Luca signed without changing a word. Before the first visit could be scheduled, a gossip site published a story claiming Elena had suffered paranoid delusions during pregnancy and abducted Luca Vital's child. The article quoted a confidential evaluation from the doctor who had signed the old guardianship petition. It included details from Elena's single panic attack and a false claim that she had threatened to harm herself. Photographers appeared outside Rossi Maritime. One shouted, "Why did you keep a father from his son?" as Elena entered the building. Another called Gabriel the hidden vital heir. Elena kept walking until the elevator doors closed. Then her knees weakened. She pressed one palm against the wall, breathing through the old sensation of a truck following her, a camera tracking her, someone else narrating her fear as proof that she could not be trusted. Rose reached for the emergency button. Elena shook her head. Don't stop the elevator. You are shaking. I can shake and still go upstairs. At the office, 6 women from the accounting department were waiting with folders. They had found withdrawals routed through the employee benefit account. Elena listened, assigned each woman a task, and spent the next 4 hours tracing the money. Work steadied her because numbers did not lower their voices and call cruelty concern. The $9 million had moved through 3 charity accounts controlled by Gianna and then into a shipping company run by Luca's lieutenant Dominic Vale. The final transfer was scheduled for Friday, the same day the board would reconsider the sale. If it cleared, the pension fund would be too weak to survive the company's debt. Elena looked at the faces around the conference table. "We have 72 hours, one accountant asked. "Should we call Mr. Vital?" "No, we call the federal auditor." Luca saw the article while sitting across from the doctor who had evaluated Elena. The doctor kept both hands on his desk. "The report was based on information provided by your office. Did Elena say she would harm herself?" "Not in those words." "In any words?" "No." "Did she threaten the child?" "No." Luca leaned back. "Then why is it in the report?" The doctor looked toward the closed door. "Ms. Gianna Rossi brought me notes. She said they came from Elena's therapist. Did you verify them?" Silence. "Who paid you?" "A Vital Foundation." Luca placed the published article on the desk. "This story repeats phrases from your report. If my attorney asks under oath, who ordered you to write them? What will you say?" The doctor's face lost color. "Mr. Vital, you approved the guardianship strategy." Luca remembered the folder on his desk, the convenient language about instability, the way he had told himself temporary custody was protection. He had not written the lies. He had signed beneath them. "Yes," he said, "I did." That afternoon, Luca's attorney explained his choices. He could deny knowledge, preserve his position, and let Gianna's story damage Elena in family court, or he could submit a sworn correction, admitting that his office commissioned the false report. The correction would destroy any custody advantage and expose him to charges for fraud, coercion, and interference with medical privacy. Lucas stood at the window overlooking the river. 5 years earlier, he would have asked which choice preserved his power. Now he saw a 5-year-old boy asking his mother whether his father was scary. Draft the correction. His attorney did not move. The federal investigation is already open. This gives them intent. I know it could be used in the Harbor case. I know. Then let me challenge the article without confessing. Luca turned from the window. My son's mother is being called insane because I found that lie useful. Correct it. The affidavit reached Rose before sunset. Elena read Luca's admission alone. He stated that she had never threatened herself or their child, that the guardianship petition had been prepared to gain leverage over her shares, and that he bore responsibility for approving it. He waived any use of the report in custody proceedings and consented to a permanent order sealing Gabriel's records. The final paragraph acknowledged that Elena had reasonable grounds to hide her location. She lowered the pages. For 5 years, she had imagined Lucer admitting the truth. In some versions, the words healed something. In others, she threw them in his face. Reality felt quieter. His confession did not return the night she had checked the farmhouse windows or the morning she gave birth without family. It did not make him safe. It did one useful thing. It placed the blame where it belonged. Rose called a minute later. Are you all right? Yes. Elena looked at the signature. No, but I will be. He may go to prison for this. He knew that when he signed. Does it change anything between you? Elena folded the affidavit and placed it with the evidence for Friday. It changes what he did today. It does not change what he did to me. Gianna discovered the affidavit when 2 federal agents arrived at her charity office with a preservation order. She called Luca 13 times. He answered the 14th. You confessed? Yes. You buried both of us. You published her medical records. I protected us. You protected $9 million. The silence on the line told him she knew he had found the transfer. Dominic handled the accounts with your signature. You cannot prove that Elena can. Jana's breathing sharpened. So that is it. She comes back, shows you a child, and I become disposable. You were never disposable. Luca's voice was tired. You were responsible. Do not speak to me as if you were faithful and I corrupted you. You came to my apartment. You told me she judged you. You promised I would stand beside you when the company was yours. I lied. Yes, Gianna said, you did. And now I know exactly what your lies are worth. She ended the call, went downstairs, and waited in the marble lobby of Vital headquarters. When Luca returned from a meeting, Gianna crossed the floor and slapped him hard enough to turn every head. Security moved forward. Luca raised one hand, stopping them. Gianna's face crumpled. She stepped into him and gripped both sides of his coat as if she needed help standing. You ruined my life, she whispered. Luca removed her hands and passed her to a female guard. Take her home, Gianna fought once, then let herself be led away. Luca watched the elevator close. He did not notice that the weight inside his coat had changed. During the embrace, Gianna had taken the brass access token from his inner pocket. The bank had released it to Luca that morning under a temporary board preservation order. He was supposed to deliver it unopened to the federal auditor before Friday's vote. Paired with Elena's key, it opened the old Rossi vault and activated its physical transfer controls. Taking it made Gianna's next move more than betrayal. It made her theft part of the federal case. The first supervised visit took place in a family services room with yellow walls, a box of worn toys, and a camera mounted above the door. Lucer arrived 20 minutes early. He brought no guards and no gifts because the court counselor had warned him that expensive presents could feel like pressure. He set a thin children's book about Chicago bridges on the table and waited. When Gabriel entered holding Elena's hand, Lucas stood, then seemed unsure what to do with his own height. He sat again so the child would not have to look up at him. Gabriel stayed beside Elena. Luca's eyes moved over his son's face with an ache he did not try to hide. Hello, Gabriel. Hello, I'm Luca. I know. The counselor invited Gabriel to choose a chair. He climbed into the one nearest Elena. Luca pushed the bridge book halfway across the table. Your mother said you like fairies. Gabriel did not touch it. How do you know what my mother says? Her lawyer told my lawyer. That's a lot of lawyers. Lucer almost smiled. It is. For 10 minutes, Gabriel answered questions with one word. Then he noticed a photograph of an old drawbridge in the book and corrected Lucer about which side lifted first. Luca listened. He did not tell the boy about the bridge his family once controlled, the men who paid to cross it, or the vital name carved beneath a stone no tourist could see. He asked Gabriel how he knew. Gabriel explained for 6 uninterrupted minutes. When he finished, he studied Luca. Why didn't you come when I was a baby? The counselor glanced at Elena. Elena kept her face still. Luca could have said he did not know. It was true, but not complete. "I hurt your mother," he said. "She had to go somewhere safe, and I did not do what a father should have done to become safe enough to find." Gabriel frowned. "Did you say sorry?" "Yes. Did it fix it?" Luca looked at Elena for the first time. "No." Gabriel nodded, as though this matched his experience with broken toys. After a few minutes, he picked up the bridge book. At the end of the hour, Luca arose and stepped away before Elena needed to ask. Gabriel carried the book to the door, then turned. "Are you coming next week?" "If your mother and the court say I can, do you want to?" Luca's throat moved. "Very much." Gabriel looked at Elena. She said, "The visit is already scheduled." Luca nodded. "Then I will be here." He arrived early the next week, too. Gabriel ignored him for the first 15 minutes and built a tower with the counselor. Luca waited without trying to purchase the child's attention. On the third visit, Gabriel fell while reaching for a toy and ran straight past Luca to Elena. Luca remained beside the table while she comforted him. He came back the following week. Elena did not call this redemption. She called it evidence. The evening after the third visit, Luca met with the federal harbor agent in a conference room chosen by the government. His attorney placed a cooperation agreement on the table. It required Luca to identify illegal routes, surrender financial records, and testify about bribery he had approved. It offered no promise that he would avoid prison. Luca read the page stating that prosecutors could use his admissions against him. His attorney touched the employee list beside his hand. "If you stay silent, Dominic completes the transfer. Rossi Maritime fails, and you may keep enough distance from the records to avoid the worst charges. If you cooperate, the pension survives, so do the legitimate routes, but you give them a path to your door." Luca looked through the names again. He recognized more of them now. Elena had made certain he would. 600 people, the agent said. "Not 600, Luca replied. 600 families, he signed. He was halfway through identifying Dominic's shell company when Rose called his attorney. Gianna had contacted Elena. She claimed Dominic planned to kill her after the money moved and offered the original account instructions in exchange for legal protection. The federal agent took the phone. Tell Miss Rossi not to meet her. A second call came before Rose could answer. This time, Gianna spoke directly to Elena. "You always said you would come if I truly needed you." Elena stood in the Rossi Maritime archive while agents recorded the call. "I said that when you were 17. I am still your sister. You stopped being my sister in Luca's study." Gianna inhaled shakily. "Dominic has already scheduled the transfer. He knows your key is the only physical override that can cancel it. If I do not bring you and the key before midnight, he will kill me. Come to the federal building. He is watching. Then tell me where the instructions are. In the vault beneath the old ferry terminal. The original books are there too, enough to prove he made the transfers." A hollow bell sounded 3 times in the background. Then a freight train passed, close enough to swallow Gianna's next words. "Pier 8, she said when the sound cleared. 9 Agne. Come alone or the records burn." The call ended. Agents knew the old terminal at Pier 8. They built a plan in 40 minutes, placed Elena in a monitored car, and sent a second team through the service road. Luca listened to the recording twice. That is not Pier 8. The lead agent looked up. The ferry bell matches the tower. Pier 8 has no rail line within half a mile. Luca replayed the freight noise. The old cold storage terminal at Pier 12 sits beside the freight spur. Why would she give the wrong location? Because Dominic is listening and expects your team at 8. Well, because Gianna expects Eleanor at 12. Luca checked his inner pocket and understood what had changed in the lobby. She has the trustee token. Elena has the key. The agent blocked him when he reached for his coat. "You are not going inside." Luca described the drainage tunnel, the lower loading room, and the alarm system installed during the years his organization used the terminal. No current building plan showed those passages. The lead agent permitted him to ride in the secondary command vehicle under federal escort, but ordered him to remain outside unless the tactical commander requested his help. The Pier 8 team stayed in place to preserve the deception. A second unit moved toward 12 without lights. Elena heard about the location change inside the monitored car. Rose sat beside her. "We stop now," Rose said. "If Gina and Dominic need your key, staying away keeps the vault closed." Elena looked at the clock. 43 minutes remained. The forged digital authorization is already scheduled to execute at midnight. My key is not only required to open the vault, it is the only physical override capable of canceling the transfer. If I stay away, Dominic does not need the vault. He only needs the clock to reach 12. The agent in front turned. "Our priority is your safety. My priority includes 600 families. You are not trained for this. I am the only person who can activate the security seal before the transfer executes." Rose took Elena's hand. "Bravery and obligation are not the same thing." "I know." Elena squeezed back. "That is why I am choosing." The plan changed. Elena would approach with the key while agents tracked her through a button camera and a transmitter hidden in the clasp of her handbag. She would not enter the lower vault until the arrest team was in position. Everyone agreed. It was a careful plan. Careful plans lasted until another person made a choice. At Pier 12, Elena found Gina alone beneath the dead ferry clock. Wind drove sleet through the broken windows. Her sister wore a red coat and no gloves. Mascara darkened the skin beneath her eyes. "Where is Dominic?" Elena asked. "Below." "Where are the account instructions?" "Below." "Then bring them up." Gianna laughed once, the sound empty. "You came with agents." "Of course I did. You used to come when I called without bringing an army. You used to call because a boy broke your heart. Now you call because you helped steal $9 million. Jana stared at the key on Elena's chain. "I never wanted it to become this." "Which part? Sleeping with my husband, taking my inheritance, or trying to call me insane? You had everything. Dad took you to the terminals and taught you how to read the ledgers. He told me to stay upstairs with Mom and smile when donors came. You inherited the company before he ever signed the papers." Elena's expression softened, but her voice did not. "Then Dad failed you. But I did not forge your name, take your husband, or call you insane. You chose what to do with that wound." Jana looked away. "Even after you vanished, everyone spoke about you as if you were the brave one." "I was terrified," Elena said. "I simply refused to make terror my son's inheritance." Footsteps sounded above them. Jana's gaze flicked toward the catwalk. Elena noticed. "This was never about protection. Dominic will kill both of us if the transfer fails. Then help me stop it." For 1 second, Gianna seemed young again, a frightened girl asking her older sister to decide. Then she stepped close and embraced Elena. Elena's arms stayed at her sides. Gianna whispered, "I'm sorry," and jerked the brass chain hard. The clasp snapped against Elena's neck. Gianna ran toward the iron stairs with the key in her fist. "Move now," Elena said toward the button camera. Static answered. Dominic's men had activated a jammer. Two figures emerged from the catwalk and blocked the main entrance. Elena reached for the outside door. It slammed shut before she arrived. Below, a steel lock turned. Luca reached the perimeter in the secondary command vehicle as Elena's camera feed died. The commanding agent ordered everyone to hold until the side entrance was cut. Luca pointed toward a rusted drainage tunnel beneath the loading ramp. That reaches the lower level. How do you know? I used this terminal before Elena cleaned it for legitimate cargo. The agent stared at him. For what? Weapons. Lucas said the word without pride or excuse. The tunnel alarm rings beside the upper loading ramp. Trigger it and Dominic's guards will leave the vault entrance. An agent searched Lucer again before allowing him near the tunnel. He carried no weapon, only his knowledge of the building. You stay between us, the commander ordered. You move when we move, and if I tell you to stop, you stop. Luca looked toward the dead camera feed. Understood. He entered the drainage tunnel between two federal agents in the vault. Gianna inserted the trustee token while Dominic held Elena at gunpoint. The room smelled of paper, cold metal, and the oil Elena's father had used on the old locks. 3 shelves contained original ledgers, property deeds, and sealed payroll records. On the far wall, a small terminal displayed the pending transfer. 12 minutes remained. Gianna pushed Elena toward the second lock. Open it. You said you had evidence. The evidence is inside. Dominic pressed the barrel against Elena's back. The key. Elena looked at the screen. Once both locks opened, the terminal would permit either immediate release or cancellation. Dominic expected her to save her life by turning the key his way. She inserted it. Turn it right, Gianna said. Elena looked at her sister. Did he tell you where you were going after this? South America. Did he show you 2 tickets? Dominic's expression shifted. Gianna noticed. Elena continued, You moved the money. You signed the charity papers. Luca's confession makes you a witness against Dominic. He does not need a partner. After midnight, turn the key, Dominic said. Elena turned it left. A red light flashed. The terminal changed from release available to security seal. Dominic struck her across the face. She fell against the metal cabinet. Gianna stared at the screen. What did you do? Closed the vault for 24 hours. No transfer, no withdrawal. Dominic seized Elena by the coat and pulled her upright. Reverse it. Blood filled her mouth. There is no reversal. He lifted the gun. Gianna stepped between them. You said nobody would be hurt. Move. You promised. You were useful because you could get close to them. You are not useful now. Gianna's face emptied as she finally heard the truth in a voice other than Elena's. Dominic shoved her aside and aimed at Elena. The old ferry alarm began ringing above them. Luca had found the wire in the drainage tunnel and cut it deliberately, pulling both guards toward the loading ramp. A second later, something heavy struck the vault door. Dominic turned toward the sound. Elena grabbed the emergency lever beside the shelves. Her father had installed it after a dock fire trapped 2 workers underground. She pulled with both hands. A steel safety gate dropped through the center of the room. It landed between Elena and Dominic, catching his arm and knocking the gun across the floor. Gianna stood on Dominic's side. He caught her by the hair and dragged her against him. "Raise it!" he shouted. Elena pressed the red lock button. "It only rises from outside, then I kill her." Gianna's eyes met Elena's through the bars. 5 years of rage stood between them. So did childhood fevers, borrowed dresses, and the morning they buried their mother. Elena reached toward the release, then stopped. "Let her go first," Dominic laughed. "You still think you are negotiating?" "No, I am giving the agents behind you time to aim." Dominic turned. The vault door burst inward. Federal agents entered with weapons raised. Luca was behind them, unarmed, blood on one sleeve from the tunnel. Dominic pressed a small knife to Jana's throat. "Back out or she dies." Luca saw the fallen gun within reach on his side of the gate. Once he would have taken it and trusted fear to make everyone else slower. He left it on the floor. "Jana," he said, "drop your weight when the lights go out." Dominic's attention snapped toward him. Elena understood before he did. She hit the vault's emergency switch. Darkness swallowed the room. Gianna dropped. An agent fired one controlled shot into Dominic's shoulder. The knife struck the floor. When the backup lights flickered on, Dominic lay face down beneath 3 agents. Gianna sat against the bars with one hand at her throat. Luca stood where he had been, both hands visible. Elena opened the safety gate only after the lead agent told her it was clear. Gianna rose unsteadily. "Elena." Her sister looked at the red mark across her throat, then at the broken brass chain on the floor. "I saved your life because I refused to become what you chose to be," Elena said. "Do not confuse that with forgiveness." An agent cuffed Gianna's hands. She began crying when the metal closed around her wrists. Luca watched her pass without reaching for her. Then he turned to Elena. A bruise was forming along her cheek. His hands curled, but he stayed several feet away. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" "No, Gabriel. Safe with Rose's sitter." Relief moved through him. Elena picked up her father's key. The chain was broken, so she closed it inside her fist. Luca looked at the sealed terminal. "The pension safe for 24 hours. Then tomorrow we finish it." Elena met his eyes. "Tomorrow you testify." "Yes." "Not for me." "I know. Not because you think prison purchases forgiveness." "I know." She waited for him to say more. Luca looked toward the agents gathering the records that would destroy what remained of his empire. "I am testifying because 600 families should not pay for the man I chose to become." Elena gave one small nod. It was not absolution. It was the first answer he had given that did not ask her to carry any part of his redemption. The public hearing began at 10 the next morning. Workers filled the gallery and stood along the walls. Reporters crowded the corridor. Elena sat at the witness table with the bruise on her face uncovered. She did not want makeup turning violence into something polite. The board chairman asked whether she still intended to oppose the vital sale. "Yes," Elena said. "I am also proposing an employee trust that places payroll and pensions beyond the reach of any family owner, including me." A murmur moved through the room. She explained it in one sentence. The workers would hold enough voting power to prevent their savings from ever being pledged to private debt again. There were no lectures about corporate structure. The people whose names Luca had read understood exactly what the promise meant. Elena presented only 3 pieces of evidence. The forged loan carried a printer code from Luca's office. The charity transfers carried Gianna's authorization and Dominic's account number. The sealed vault records showed that Luca's organizations had used Rossi trucks for illegal cargo while billing the company for legitimate freight. Then Luca took the oath. His attorney sat behind him with both hands closed. The prosecutor asked who had approved the false medical report. "I did." Who had allowed Elena's signature to be copied? I did. Who had benefited from using her company to hide criminal shipments? I did. Each answer stripped another layer from the story he had told himself for years. Gianna had lied. Dominic had stolen. The doctor had taken money. None of it changed the fact that Luca had created a world where lies became useful and honest people became obstacles. The chairman asked whether Elena had abandoned Rossi Maritime. Luca looked across the room at her. No. She carried it out of a burning house. A reporter's camera clicked. He continued before courage could become performance. I called her unstable when she recognized danger. I called control protection because protection sounded like love. She left with our child because my name made staying unsafe. Elena held his gaze. There was no victory in hearing him say it. There was relief and grief and the strange quiet that comes when a truth no longer needs to fight for air. The board rejected the vital sale unanimously. The employee trust passed by one vote after Luca directed the single vital creditor seat to vote in favor. He then signed a permanent surrender of every claim he held against Rossi Maritime. Federal agents waited outside the chamber. When he walked toward them, 600 workers kept their jobs. His empire lasted 11 seconds longer. Luca was arrested for racketeering, fraud, coercion, and obstruction. His cooperation exposed 2 illegal routes, 4 corrupt officials, and Dominic's hidden accounts. With no evidence that Luca had personally ordered a killing, he received 9 years in federal prison. Dominic received 22. Gianna pleaded guilty to fraud, unlawful disclosure of medical information, and conspiracy. She received 6 years. When Gianna told the court she had always felt second to Elena, the judge said pain could explain a motive without excusing a crime. Elena attended neither hearing. She spent that morning signing Rossi Maritime's first independent pension charter with 12 employee representatives. 2 days before Luca reported to prison, the court allowed one final supervised visit. Gabriel brought the bridge book, now bent at the corners. He climbed into his usual chair and looked at Luca's plain clothes. "Mom says you are going away. I am because you are bad." Luca took time before answering, "Because I did bad things, knew they were wrong, and believed being powerful would keep me from paying for them. Will you come back?" Not for a long time. Gabriel traced one finger along the book's cover. "Mom came back. Your mother went away to keep you safe. I am going away because a court says I must. Are you sorry?" "Yes." "Does that fix it?" Lucer almost smiled at the familiar question. "No, it tells me what I have to do next." "What?" "Tell the truth. Follow the rules. Be your father in whatever way you and your mother allow." Gabriel considered him. Then he pushed the bridge book across the table. "You can take it. Prisons probably have boring books." Luca pressed his hand over the worn cover. "I will keep it safe." Elena waited beside the painted line in the visitation room. "Your sentence does not settle a debt with me," she told Luca, "and when you are released, you will not return to my home or company." Lucer accepted both conditions. Looking through the window at Gabriel, he said, "I thought losing power would feel like dying. It feels like discovering how much living I missed while I guarded it." Elena left him with the sadness he had earned. "Then do not waste the years you have left." Luca wrote one letter each month through Rose, never including money, promises, or questions that demanded an answer. Elena stored them until Gabriel turned 7. Then she shared one explaining that even strong bridges failed when forced to carry what they were never designed to hold. Gabriel wrote back 3 sentences. Lucer answered with 2. Their relationship grew at the speed of the child, not the hunger of the father. Elena stayed in Chicago because leaving was no longer necessary for freedom. Rossi Maritime restored its pension reserve and funded the Open Door program for workers facing financial abuse. Elena kept the name after a frightened warehouse clerk arrived with a forged mortgage and 2 children waiting in her car. Over 6 years, the program helped hundreds of women secure legal advice, emergency housing, and control of their own accounts. Elena never told them to leave. She made certain leaving was a choice they could afford. Gianna sent 4 prison letters. The first 3 blamed Luca, their parents, and Elena. The last said only, "I wanted your life so badly that I helped destroy it. Then I discovered I could not live inside what was left." Elena kept the letter but did not answer. Forgiveness, if it came, would belong to her. Luca's continued cooperation exposed additional accounts and officials, and a federal judge later approved a limited sentence reduction. He served 6 years and 8 months before supervised release. He left prison on a snowy afternoon, carrying the bridge book and a paper bag of clothes. Rose arranged a room at a re-entry residence and legitimate work. For 4 months, Luca followed every restriction, attended counseling, and met Gabriel in a public family center. He never asked Elena for Christmas. Gabriel did. He was 11, tall for his age, with an engineer's patience and a child's belief that one carefully reasoned request should defeat every objection. "Not dinner," he told Elena. "Pie 1 hour. Rose can stay." Elena looked across the kitchen at the blue stocking she had carried into Luca's study years earlier. She had kept it not because it belonged to the marriage, but because it belonged to the child who had survived it. "Why do you want him here?" she asked. "Because he is my father, and because he waits now." Elena knew waiting did not erase betrayal. It did reveal whether change could survive without reward. 1 hour, she said. On Christmas Eve, Luca arrived alone and stood outside Elena's door while snow gathered on his shoulders. Through the window, he could see Gabriel hanging the small blue stocking beside the fireplace. Rose was cutting pie at the kitchen counter. Elena opened the door but did not step aside. Luca's eyes moved to the stocking, then back to her. "I know I do not deserve another chance." "No," Elena said, "you do not." He accepted the words without lowering his gaze. But Gabriel deserves a father who finally learned that love is not ownership. Elena looked toward her son. "Whether you become that father will be decided one ordinary day at a time. I understand. This is not our marriage beginning again. I understand that too." Gabriel appeared behind her holding 2 plates. "The pie is getting cold." Elena stepped aside. Luca crossed the threshold only after she did. He stayed 58 minutes. He listened while Gabriel explained a school bridge project, asked Rose whether she needed help with the dishes, and left when the clock reached the hour. At the door, Gabriel hugged him first. Luca closed his eyes, but did not hold on after the boy let go. Elena watched from the hall. She felt no pull toward the old life, no wish to place her hand back inside the cage, simply because the man who built it had learned to open the door. She felt something steadier, the freedom to recognize change without surrendering the self she had fought to recover. After Luca left, Gabriel returned to the tree. "Mom, the stocking is crooked." Elena adjusted it. The silver bell gave the same small sound it had made when it fell outside Luca's study. Once that sound had marked the end of her marriage. Now it belonged to a warm house, a protected company, a child who knew the truth, and a woman whose name no one else controlled. Elena touched the brass key resting against her chest. She had disappeared from Luca Vital's world on a winter night. She had not disappeared from her own. Some people escaped by running until no one could find them. Eleanor escaped by returning as the one person no betrayal could erase.